Welcome to Chelsea's Vocation. Chelsea raised 2 children on the autism spectrum, Justice and Noey, into adulthood. They're the reason why she can't help but smile when she recognizes autism in another human, especially a child. Chelsea spent almost 2 decades studying this neurotype as a parent professional, learning how to better adapt her own behavior and the environment around autistic children to both encourage and foster their development. She hopes through this podcast that you might better understand how neurotypical people process your neurology if you're autistic, or how to better yourself as someone who values autistic humans and your relationship with them. Chelsea is a lifelong learner and expects you are too. So don't hesitate to reach out to her through social media comments or the contact form on our website with your own insights. If you're coming to this podcast after the first 5 episodes, you may want to go to the show and review 1 or more of those foundational episodes to know where she's coming from. Either way, we're glad you're here now.
2025 is the year of anniversaries for me and my man, Pete. We met when we were sophomores in high school, started dating when we were seniors, and got married just weeks after I graduated college. Pete had a double major and earned his bachelor's a year later. So now we're 35 years in as a couple and 30 of them as committed partners. What a journey it has been. By all accounts, we should not have made it. We both came from households with divorced parents. That alone, statistically, might have guaranteed our eventual divorce. Check out the article that I'm linking in the show notes. A shockingly low percentage, maybe only 2% of high school sweethearts marry at all. And of those that do, at least half are divorced within a decade. Add a child with autism to the mix, and the data suggests a higher rate of marriage failure. There's another article in the show notes linked for you. If you add yet another child with autism in the mix, there are actually no statistics for that on the impact of marriage. I've linked another Interactive Autism Network article on marriage in this show description back in episode 5, which was Pete's growth. And I'm going to link that article again because I love it. There's a particular pull quote that sums up the relationship impact of the parenting part of our journey. Quote, autism does one of 2 things. It drives families apart or it makes them stronger. Before we even got engaged, which was the day after Pete's 21st birthday, we were both individually committed to never divorcing. We were really convinced by the words Jesus spoke as recorded in Matthew 19, verses 3 through 6. And the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Jesus answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the 2 shall become one flesh. So they're no longer 2, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. We took that personally. Man meant us. We were not going to separate ourselves from one another. So that left us with a choice. Live miserably or figure it out. And we did live miserably on and off in seasons of our marriage, sometimes individually and sometimes collectively. But I believe that God knew our heart's desires and kept giving us reasons to fall back in love with one another. It might have been couples or individuals therapy. It might have been a book, a podcast, or a perspective shift. It was always God's grace. Because I don't think there's any other way that we can go from teenagers matriculating through separate colleges to marrying before our frontal lobes were fully developed to young, broke parents and manage to grow and change in the same direction. He cemented in us a determination to choose each other. I'm really grateful that Pete was willing to come back onto this podcast episode with me to talk about the journey as partners as we raised our kids together. So I had 3 questions that Pete and I are going to talk about. First one, Pete, was there a bit of advice you received from someone else that helped you become a better partner?
Yeah, so you mentioned we started in high school. Right before I graduated, I started working at Kohl's. And I was a stocker, and I befriended this guy, Ray, fantastic guy. He had been married over 50 years, World War II vet. And one of the things he mentioned to me is he said, you're going to need to learn to live 95-5 if you want a successful marriage. So he went on to explain that what that means is being intentional in considering what's best for your wife 95% of the time. And if she does the same, the problems you face will be very manageable because you're essentially not letting selfishness cloud your judgment. Now, that sounds amazing, and I didn't follow that, but it was upfront something that kind of shifted my thinking. And I think also we've been blessed in many respects to have gone through with our families and our parents multiple divorces, which at first seems very strange. But I think that has taught us many things that we would never do, and we are very intentional to not do. And then also we've seen a lot of family friends and their parents that have long-standing relationships. They really respect and honor each other and really work together as a team. And even biblically, right? So it talks in Ephesians about the importance of a husband to love his wife as Christ loved the church and to give himself up for her. And I think that when things are tough, it's super important to be mindful of that because that helps keep you on the straight and narrow.
You know, it's really funny. That 95-5 thing, I actually thought came later from someone at church. So it's really cool to know that came long before we were engaged then, yeah?
Yeah. It was when I was stocking at Kohl's.
That's really cool. Because I remember you and I talking about it, but I had always heard that marriage was 50-50, that's what real partnerships are, right? It's each of you carrying equal amounts of weight. But 50-50 is often selfish as it is outward. So 50-50 doesn't work. And I think that 95-5 thing really kind of speaks to the value you put on your partner. So I think we've really tried to do that. We didn't do it all the time. The other part of the 95-5, you and I were talking about this earlier today, is that sometimes you think you know what the other person needs, what's good for the other person. But then as you get to know them better, your perspective shifts. Like maybe that's not what's best for them. So 95-5 evolves too. I actually remember hearing a quote from Antonio Banderas. I think it was on some, like Hollywood TV show or something like that. And his wife at the time, Melanie Griffith, was going through rehab for addiction. He said something along the lines of, when you're with someone long enough, you'll fall in love with them all over again. And I remember that just kind of reminding me of the permanence of a marriage relationship. I think having my parents be divorced and remarried so many times over, I didn't really think about marriage as something that could be permanent. And even though we had made that commitment, it just didn't seem like it was real. So that gave me a perspective as a young married person that even if we don't feel in love, we'll fall in love all over again. And I think that's really been true of our relationship because, love is a feeling, but it's also an action, right? So you don't always feel in love, but sometimes if you go through the actions, you do that 95-5 thing, you will fall in love all over again. Don't you think?
Yeah. And I think the longer we've been together, one of the things, especially in the last, I would say 15 years, we've been intentional not only to have date nights, but now we have coffee together and just spending the early morning time before everything else, just connecting, reflecting on what's going on and something maybe we've read or experienced, and then just walking through that together. It helps us to not only process that, but I think it also helps to dispel, misconceptions where, oh, I think you would really like this. And you find out, oh, geez, no, that's not right. So I think it's that humility too of being willing to reflect on what you believe and then find out that you might be wrong.
Another thing, I think it was my grandfather who said it to my uncle, but it was a heated moment between my grandfather and my uncle when he was a punky teenager, because at the time my uncle was disrespecting his mama and my grandfather wasn't having that. And he said, look, she was my wife before she was your mother, and she'll be my wife when you're gone. And even though this was kind of like an alpha male moment, it reminds you that there are seasons in your marriage. There's a season before you have children, and then there's a season when you're raising babies, and then there's a season when you're no longer raising babies. And you have to go back to being a partnership. You have to go back to being a couple and making sure you've got a foundation to return to. And so that made me think about staying connected as partners, because we're not going to be in the thick of parenting forever. We're going to have some things in common. We're going to have to grow together, change together, so that when we're done with that season of marriage, we still have one another as we started.
It's super important for the kids to see that as well, right? So otherwise, if you're a child, you're going to want to get your way. And sometimes you're like, I'm going to go ask mom because I think she's softer than dad or whatever. But if you are aligned and then they know they're going to come to me and I'm going to say, well, what did mom say? Then they know, okay, these guys are unified. And I think it's also super important that they see acts of affection, making sure that they see we do love each other and we want what's best for each other. And obviously we want what's best for our family, but seeing that affection, even though they might be like, oh, dad, that's gross. But I think it's healthy. It's good for them to know because that also gives them security in that our family is unified. And that's one less thing that they have to worry about.
That's a good point. And to what the kids will worry about, it was interesting as I was doing the research for this episode, especially when it comes to couples who are coming from households where their parents were divorced. It's really not about not fighting in front of your kids. Fighting in front of your kids when you do it fairly and when there's resolution is actually a good thing. It's a good thing for them to see there are people, they have conflicts, they resolve their conflicts in a respectful way. But I remember especially Noey being worried anytime we would fight, are you guys going to get a divorce? And I think it had something to do with Noey seeing some of their friends' parents getting divorced in that mix. But we're like, no, we're not getting divorced. Just because we argue, just because we have conflict, doesn't mean that we don't have a good marriage, doesn't mean that we don't love each other, doesn't mean that we don't have a good relationship. But then, to have them see us doing things together. In fact, this was such a cool thing. And this kind of leads me into my next question. When we're in the thick of parenting, what do you think helped us get through with our marriage intact? And I just want to give you a shout out for one of the things, because sometimes the little things are the big things to keep a marriage going, especially when so much of your energy is devoted to parenting. But I remember, I think it was for my 30th birthday, you surprised me with ballroom dance lesson. And the extra cool thing about that is there had been a storm and the power had gone out. And so we show up at this dance studio and I didn't know that's what we were doing. So I had like entirely the wrong footwear for the occasion. But they had lit the dance floor with candle lights in the studio. We had our dance lesson and I'm pretty sure I cried during half of it. But those are like the little things that become the big things, right? It's that thoughtfulness. It's that 95.5. It's that helping me find part of myself when I was up to my eyeballs in diapers and baby talk and whatever else was going on in our household at that time. Those kinds of things, I think, are what carried us through that part. What do you remember?
Yeah, well, I always felt early on, especially a little guilty because I was the good time dad, right? So I was always working during the day and you had to deal with a lot more of the headaches and the pain and the no's, right? So no, you can't do that. No, stop that and so on. So I get home and hear like 1,000 footsteps and they're rushing to me. And then I get to hug and play with them. Well, I only hear the good stuff, but I think that did give you a little reprieve. I think in general, though, there's times where there's things that you're naturally good at and there's things that I'm able to manage. And, we work together to try to even the load and support each other and work to our strengths. I think the kids see that. And I think it also helps them.
Well, I think we did a really good job in that tag team parenting. And I don't know that it was necessarily something that we did intentionally, but it is something that we did out of necessity. If someone asked me what my favorite sound was, I was like, it was the garage door opening when you were coming home from work, because that meant I was going to get to tap out for a little bit. And I remember perhaps more than once, especially in the summer when the kids weren't in school and you have them all day. I think I might have greeted you at the door with a cocktail in my hand.
Or hand me a kid, like arms outstretched. And
you take your son, you take your daughter.
That's great stuff, though, too. I mean, I definitely had, I think, the more favorable exchange during that time. You were really dealing with a lot of the heavy lifting. And while I gave you reprieve, I don't think it was equitable, but we were able to work through it.
Yeah, but I think too, and this kind of goes back to the idea of the perspective shift and how that sometimes relieves a stress that's building up in the marriage. We made choices early on when we had kids because we had them a little younger than we were originally planning. So it's not like we had this great nest egg already where we could pay for childcare while I worked and you worked. I mean, you worked 2 jobs so that I could stay home with the kids. And while I think that was great for us as a family, it caused me to start to lose myself, right? I started just getting swallowed up being a mom. I didn't even feel like a wife anymore. I just felt like a provider of care to these incredibly wonderful but needy children without a ton of support. And it's not like you should have been there to provide the support. You had to be out there to provide for our family. But sometimes when you're siloed in this place where nobody understands you, nobody understands your struggle, nobody understands your kids, you go out anywhere in the community and you get stares of judgment everywhere you go. It feels suffocating. And that's not something that you were trying to put on me. Although we talked about this before, especially early on after Justice was diagnosed. You felt like you were more successful at work than you were at home. We didn't know what to do for Justice. We didn't know, he wasn't communicating at the time, not in a way that we could understand. We were constantly frustrating him without realizing that's what we were doing. So escaping into work, it had two functions, right? It gave you a place where you were successful, and it gave you a way to provide for our family. So eventually, when I got over this, he's not working two jobs to avoid us. He's working two jobs to provide for us. I think that made it a lot easier for me to understand that even though we were kind of working on separate tracks, we were working toward the same destination. As we're having this conversation and we dissolve into giggles every now and then, that's humor. Having a sense of humor has been such an important part of our relationship, even before we had kids, but ever so much more once we did. You and I, because we were children together, really, when we started dating, we had inside jokes galore. We Buddes seem to have a genetic predisposition for movie talk, right? Our kids remember lines from movies, your sisters, your parents, like we are movie talkers. My brothers even, like we love to talk in movie quotes. Sometimes there would be a movie quote that our kids didn't understand, but it just like, again, popped that tension bubble a little bit. And as we're coming up on the holidays and I'm starting to listen to Christmas music on the radio, every time I hear it's the holiday season, does that make you laugh?
Oh, yeah.
Because let's just keep it real for a minute. The holidays are wonderful, magical, but also super stressful. And they're super stressful for neurospicy kids. Everything's changing. They're so overstimulated. We're dragging them around to stuff they don't necessarily want to participate in. You've got all these families who want all this time. And then, of course, with our families being like married, divorced, remarried, there's multiple families to try to get in. You can never spend enough time anywhere. And your kids are just running ragged.
And you're running late.
Oh, yeah.
And then your kids are accustomed to structure. And this is just antithetical to everything that helps them to be successful. And literally, it's like Christmas Eve morning, you're in one location. Christmas Eve night, you're in another. Christmas Day morning, you're in another. And invariably, you're running late and you're not staying long enough and the kids are frustrated. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it also helped us to build some tools and keep the big picture about, okay, these things that we're sweating here, or maybe they're frustrating one of our parents, et cetera. It's kind of like, yeah, you know, that's not something that we're going to sweat. We're not going to sweat that. That's a small thing in the big picture, right?
Yeah. But the song is how we would release our own tension valve. You know, you've got one kid melting down, the other kid pushing that one's buttons and just perpetuating the nonsense. And so then here's you and me in the front. It's the holiday season. Because if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right? So now we're at this point. We've been married for 30 years. Our kids are grown, right? We have almost a 27-year-old and a 24-year-old. And we might never be empty nesters. We've had this conversation. The house that we're in now and the house that we were in previously, we were really deliberate to make sure Justice had this dignified, grown-up space of his own so that he could live in his own space, but with us. And I think certainly for the foreseeable future, Justice will be living with us. Even if Justice decides at some point he no longer wants to live in our house, I think we'll be pretty integral parts of his natural supports. Mm-hmm. But it certainly doesn't mean that we haven't reached a new kind of phase in our relationship. I think the last 5 years is really when this started. Noey was away at college in Chicago and really, for all intents and purposes, lives in Chicago. And Justice is set in his own adulting. He's kind of got a rhythm of work, of recreation, of his own hobbies and activities that he does here at home and out in the community. It's not like he's able to transport himself. We provide his transportation or arrange for it as need be. But I think we've found this place where we're not actively parenting anymore, right? We're providing some natural supports for Justice and a little bit minimally for Noey, but we can enjoy each other as a couple again. And that's been really neat, I think, to have that change. We've been able to travel a little bit. Many years ago, we took a long overseas trip, and Justice made us promise to never do that again. It was entirely too long. But he's older now, and he's more secure in who he is and what he needs. And we understand better how to provide that in our absence. But how do you see this new phase of our partnership journey?
Yeah, I think one of the blessings of the last 10, 15 years is just the intentionality that we're spending together, just enjoying being with each other. And we recently went on a trip, and in retrospect, the part I really enjoyed the most, honestly, was just spending time with you and experiencing these things together and reminiscing and reflecting on things. And you mentioned he's got a lot more tools in his toolbox now than even 4, 5, 6 years ago. And so he's excited with the proposition of us leaving because he doesn't have to work. And then he can eat all the candy he gets from solo shopping, and aunts and uncles come by and he takes advantage of that. He's living his best life, and that also brings us joy. Yeah, it's just another chapter, but I really appreciate the intentionality. We're starting to look at different goals and things that we want to experience. Things are also complicated now with my mom, with all the work you're providing and support for her. It's a little different, right? It's obviously not parenting, but it's also trying to do the right thing and support those you love and in the right way. It's just new things to experience and to work through together and take each day a step at a time.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to be in this kind of sandwich generation situation where we had our kids young, even though it's not really what we expected. We're like, oh gosh, then by the time our kids are grown and by the time we get to retire, we should be able to do some really great things together. And I don't think back then we were considering the care we were going to have to provide perhaps for our parents as they get older. Part of the blessing of you being so diligent in working these two jobs your entire adult life is that it affords me the opportunity to do passion projects, which gives me the flexibility to provide whatever interventions and care your mom needs, provide whatever interventions and care and transportation our son needs. I think we've got like this really neat balance where we're still being pulled in different directions, but we've got the same goals in mind. We've got the same North Star. We recognize this 95-5 principle and how important it is for us to stay together in a tight partnership, because without that tight partnership, all of the other plates stop spinning and start falling, right? I'm so glad that we've been able to maintain this closeness. It's not always been perfect, obviously. I think there might have been times where I wasn't your favorite person. And maybe there were times where the very sound of your voice made me cringe just a little bit.
You're not alone. I think that's probably shared by a lot of folks. But
Uh-huh. I don't want to sit here and pretend like we've always had it all figured out, because we sure have not. But I think it's the persistence, it's the patience, it's the commitment, it's the grace of God. It's believing that he put us together and he's going to carry us through, right? That's really kind of gotten us to this place where we are 35 years in.
Yeah, and I think it's also maybe being vulnerable and being humble enough to ask the tough questions. I think as you get older, you really dwell on, okay, what part of this challenge do I own? And what can I do to make this better? And I think you look back at the energy we had when we were young parents and all the challenges, but I think it prepares us. Sometimes you do it well, sometimes not so well, but it's like the saying, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. I think also just having you as a thought partner is so important, because there's a lot of situations where you're a lot more, I think, wise or patient. Like I can quickly assess, okay, this is the situation. You'd say, well, did you consider this? Or so just that humility and being willing to be vulnerable and critical. And I think that we just keep learning from that.
So in the show notes, I have a little bit of a playlist. I put a few songs in there, and I will admit that as I listened to one of the songs, it was I need a whole tissue experience. Thanks for joining me today. If you have any ideas, any comments, any tips for parents who are just starting out, if you guys figured out a partnership hack, a relationship hack, and you want to share that with the listeners, please go ahead and send a comment. We really appreciate that.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Chelsea's Vocation. We hope it was valuable to you. If it was, we'd appreciate you sharing it with someone, reviewing it, and/or rating it. Subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes are published. We wish you the best as you learn, maybe unlearn, and do better for yourself and those around you. Chelsea encourages you to be gentle with yourself, be gracious with others, and be protective of your own and others' dignity. Until next time, take care.